I think going deep is very important with community. And I think instead of having, let's say, 800 people who tried it once, but having this 10 people really investing their day and night into learning and disseminating this knowledge and really like focusing on the community building, that's actually, I think, the most valuable and what I would call success.
Super excited to have Gizem from Harmony Blockchain here as our guest on the Hidden Gems podcast. Gizem, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Ganesh. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Okay, so let's get started. Like, what brought you to the space? What is your background? And let's get into that. And then how specifically you ended working on this particular project at Harmony.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'm actually relatively newer to the crypto space. I got professionally involved last year. I started as an MBA intern at Harmony. But before that, I was actually in business school, and I was going down to this very business, traditional oriented path. And before business school, I was working in management consulting as well at McKinsey. So this whole pivot that I made in business school was a big, I think, milestone in my life. And that's actually happened when I started reading about Ethereum. When I finally have some free time in business school, and I was kind of just like reading stuff, and I knew about Bitcoin. I traded Bitcoin when I was in college around like 2012, 13, but I never really got deep into the underlying technology, I believe. But the concept of smart contracts and this concept of decentralized applications, that I think unveiled the new world, and I got super excited. But I also got sad because I was in business school, and business school isn't really the place that you can actually see a lot of opportunities. But luckily for me, maybe you know Sahil in our team. He's also from my business school. And then we got connected, and I actually joined a career track called West Track, where we were visiting all these Silicon Valley companies and startups at all stages. I got to meet with Harmony. And then from, I think, the first moment, the chemistry was there with the co-founders, especially Steven. Their backgrounds, also the culture and the feeling that I have in the office is really like a family feeling. You probably also know this from the barbecues as well. So that really, I think, sold me to make a switch in terms of career, but it was a big risk that I was taking. But I'm actually glad that I did. I signed up to be an MBA intern, but then I quickly evolved to being a product person because we didn't really have a product team back then. And actually, my background, my bachelor's in engineering, so there's some sort of place for me where I can act between both business and technology. So that's how I started kind of even building the product team with Sahil ground up.
Okay, and so when you started out as an intern, you started on the business side. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And so, what were some of the first projects that you worked on, and when was the transition to full time?
So initially, actually, I was supposed to work on DeFi, and maybe you remember the call that I had with you was one of my first calls actually in the crypto space. I was like trying to learn about DeFi and like what's going on out there, but we quickly realized last summer wasn't really the time for us to focus on DeFi, but actually it was the time to focus on validator community. And I quickly saw that because when you talk about DeFi and partners, you talk about so many hypothetical things, but there's that live, living, real validators that are actually using your product at that very moment. And it kind of felt like there could be a lot more to be done there. And we keep talking about decentralization being the most important aspect for us, coupled with scalability. And then, as you said, who knows these things in all around the world? There are no more than 200, 300 people who really understand, who really cares about. So that's how I actually started working on our incentivized testnet. We called it Pangea. And it actually got pretty popular, got a lot of traction. I think that was my first campaign that I managed, which was in the middle of my project, sorry, internship. And actually, once I launched that, I knew I didn't want to go back to school. So I deferred my second year at Harvard, and I just switched here full time. Actually, I guess they didn't hire me. I kind of just hired myself, and I kind of jumped off the cliff, and it's been great since.
That's awesome. Just the top of your head, what is the toughest problem you are solving right now, like right this very moment?
I think decentralization is still one of the biggest problems that we're trying to solve, and it's not really about how you. It's actually about how you design your staking mechanism and economics in a way that will boost decentralization. But as we said again, there is like limited number of people who actually know and are actually interested to do these things. So that's actually still a large problem that we have. Around 200 validators registered in our mainnet right now, but only 49 of them are elected, and that number keeps changing. But we really want to increase that individual validator count. So we're considering a few protocol changes, such as maybe increasing the seats. We're talking with community very closely in those improvement proposals. But also there are other things, such as, for example, Binance runs its own validator, but they're also delegating the large majority of their holdings. So what we can do is actually we're trying to give them as large and as extensive validator list as possible directly from the chain, so they can distribute their tokens as much as possible. So there are like different, I think, aspects we're tackling this problem from, but that is the biggest challenge the teams see.
This open staking is a big milestone for Harmony and the entire community, because suddenly you've given up the security of this thing to the people. And that's how it's different from a centralized database. I mean, that's the whole point of blockchains. So it's actually a pretty big deal for you guys, right? And so what have you learned since launching that is like that made you go, oh my God, this is not something I expected. This is not in my beautiful Notion product plans or something like that?
I think so. All the tests, I think what we did not wrong, particularly about all of our testnet configurations, was really fast. So each epoch would be sometimes like 5 minutes. I think at one point we increased it to half an hour, but right now it's 1.5 days. And that really changes like how quickly the metrics and numbers can change in the system, because you have this 1.5 day lag. And because you have that lag, people, I believe, take less frequent actions because they can't see the result of it as quickly, and it's relatively new. So I think the biggest shock to me, where we designed almost a lot of things for the steady state of the protocol, but when we're ramping up with, let's say, with a fewer number of validators, or when we have the epoch time so much longer than our testing, that it actually like really changes the dynamics that we're like, we expected to see a change, and our partners and validators wants to see a change in the network, for example, but that takes at least a week to actually for the stones to really move. So I think that's been surprising, that things move, I think, a lot slower in real life.
Let's have a description of staking. What does it mean? Who are the stakeholders, and how are the incentives aligned?
Okay, staking is, I guess it's simply locking the tokens in a validator's account for the security of a blockchain. It's evolved from proof of work. It became proof of stake to address scalable problem. And in this case, I guess we're replacing the cost of the mining hardware with actual tokens that you stake and lock in the system. And I think from a user point of view, like from a delegator point of view, I like to explain this as more like a savings product, and most of the central exchanges does this as well. It's very similar that you put a deposit in a bank in a savings account, and you get an annual interest paid out just because you keep that account for a period of time in that particular bank. So it's pretty similar. What we're doing is we're open sourcing the code so everyone knows how it works and how the things work, so everyone can get in it permissionlessly and start staking and start earning rewards, basically.
So now let's go through this process of building a staking model. And so you can have, so let's just define a box with the parameters. So you have generally, let's say you start with a X amount of supply, and then you have inflation. And the inflation is distributed pro rata to the validators, and to the delegators. And you also have transaction fee based fees that apps pay in order to get that security. Now, that's the overall framework, and that's very similar to every other proof of stake network, you know, just the parameters change. So starting from scratch, can you walk me through, you have a blank sheet, how would you build this model? And what were some of the things that you had to iterate multiple times on? And what, yeah, just walk me through that story there.
Maybe I can talk about the effective proof of stake that we have. That actually takes, it's a different take on how you said pro rata distribution of the block rewards. We actually do this in a different way where we calculate an so we have something called effective stake, and that means imagine all validators stakes being distributed on a chart. And this, we select the median stake, that is the median validator. And we have this constant or a variable, which is 15% right now. If you're greater than the 1.15 of the median, that means that validator is a large validator because it's getting too far apart from the median. And we kept their rewards as if they're max 1.15 of the median. So they can have, let's say, 10x of the median, but they will only earn as if they have 1.15 times of the median stake balance. And that goes on the other side of the chart as well. If you're a small validator, let's say your stake is 1/10 of the median stake, but you made it to the committee because there were enough slots. In this case, we want to boost this validator by matching its stake with the 15%, but now in the other side. So it's like 0.85 times median. That validator will earn as if it has that many stakes, whereas actually in real life, they have actually really low stakes. So that actually creates the small validators to have really high expected returns, which is the primary metric for delegators to decide when they're looking at our staking dashboard. That is the primary metric. And so that's why we designed it in a way that will bring the smaller validators more upfront, especially on staking dashboard, as well as incentivizing them to receive a lot more delegations.
And so my follow-up question there is, you have the median, and what if the median starts to drift upwards, which is a sign of centralization, which means you have to constantly onboard smaller validators. Is that a scenario that you envision happening?
Yes. So I think we're at that stage where we did best kind of setting up the algorithm and the model, but now it's actually about bringing all those people one by one and actually onboarding them to the system. We actually have another concept where we have this BLS keys or slots that represent this 320 slots in our mainnet. So each validator can actually bid for multiple slots. And what happens right now in the chain is there are some larger validators. They're mostly receiving delegations from the community and from like large exchanges, for example. What they do is they keep adding more BLS keys to their nodes. And that means they're adding more nodes. So they're actually signing more transactions in parallel, more blocks in parallel. So actually acting like multiple nodes in that sense. So that is another nuance that we have, that validators have to keep playing with their number of BLS keys to adjust their bids, and that essentially gives their ranking in the community.
So I guess that addresses the point where I'm guessing these validators are anonymous. They don't have to go through a KYC program, or, I mean, obviously initially you're going to have a whitelist while the network is still reaching stability. But in the future, this idea that you just shared will prevent validators from splitting their stake and appearing as two validators, even though in theory it's the same validator on the back end.
Yeah, I think if they have a malicious intention behind that, they can still do that. I think the setup allows that, definitely. But what we see in validator behavior is they don't want to split up their validators, because they spend a lot on awareness, marketing, like the name of that validator,
right.
And they want to just give like a one leg stake with us, just link on the dashboard. So yeah, I was also expecting like, oh, like how are we gonna know which validators who? But they're actually incentivized to have a single validator. But you can, if you go to our staking dashboard, you can see, if you go to a validator detail page, a profile page, you see how many slots they're running in which shard. So that tells you how much of voting power together with their stake they have in the system.
Let's now jump to a recent blog post that you wrote on calculating expected returns. So walk us through that thing.
Okay, so now that I explained effective stake, now it's easier to explain. So okay, so I did say expected return is the primary metric for any delegated decision. So that's why this metric, how it's calculated, became really important and questionable in the community very early on, because it was I think, somewhat complex metric for people to understand and also kind of like make sense of, just because of this effective proof of stake model that I just explained to you. Not necessarily your stake translates into your proportional reward. So how do we do this is, let's say we have 3 validators and 5 slots, and we have validator X, Y, Z, and slots A, B, C, D, E. And validator X has 1 slot with 1,000 stake, let's say, and I'm keeping everything super simple so the calculations will be very obvious to understand. Validator Y, let's say, have 2 slots, B and C, and in each slot it has 2,000 stakes. So validator Y actually has 4,000 tokens, but it splits into 2 slots. So its bid is actually 2,000. And let's say validator Z again has 2 slots, D and E, and their bid is actually 750. That means the validator Z's total stake is 1,500. All right. So what we do is, so we sort these stakes, and then we take this median plus minus capped versus boosting. And when we do that, for example, validator X is in very close to median, so that's effective stake is equal to its beginning stake, so it's 8,000. But what happens to validator Y? It gets capped because it is twice the median, and then it has 2,000, but it will only earn as if it had 1,150, so 1,150 tokens in 1 slot. And another thing happens to validator Z. For example, validator Z had 750 stake per slot, but now it's way below the median, more than 1.15% range. That's effective stake actually becomes 850. So validator Z, even though they have 750 per slot, they will earn as if they have 850 stake per slot. So that's the first step of actually getting the effective stakes calculated. And then we look at each block. So I did this example for an epoch, but what actually happens is you distribute block rewards at each block, not at each epoch. So every shard has a fixed number of block rewards, And those block rewards get shared across the validators or the keys actually who sign those blocks. For example, if you have, we talked about multiple, having multiple keys, right? So if you have if you have three keys, but if one of your keys missed signing, then you wouldn't get that. So like those are other details, but to keep it simple, we can make that assumption. Why I mentioned block rewards is I introduced this concept of signing ratio in my blog post, which is not actually how it is calculated on the chain, because as I said, we distribute based on blocks, but it's way more easier to explain things in an epoch because that's the committee lifetime and that's where the expected return is actually calculated at the end. So I included something called a percentage signing rate throughout the epoch per validator, and you actually get those per slot as well. As I said, for different keys can have different signing rates, but then in the end that will boil down to an aggregated signing rate per validator, which relates to uptime, and that's gonna directly affect the expected return that validator reaches at the end of the epoch. And since expected return is in the industry, it's used for annualized returns. We don't want to say APR too much, but we annualize that. So if you earn in 1.5 days, if you earn with this stake this much, how much would that be if we extrapolate that to annualized? So that's what we do. And then after that, so I said this is epoch per epoch. And the thing with EPOS is things change, things get very dynamic. A validator can get unelected and get re-elected. Sometimes it can be below median, sometimes above median. So we see it being really dynamic. And it's actually, what we do is we aggregate these expected return snapshots per epoch and we take an average. So if you're at the epoch, let's say 5 right now, that would be showing the average of the past 4 epochs expect the returns per that validator to kind of make that metric a little bit more robust.
Okay, so let's go back into centralization. This is one of the cornerstones of blockchain networks. So definitely validator side, centralization, you have effectively addressed that, sorry for the pun, but effective POS. So there's, that's like a check mark there. What other ways can centralization be accidentally introduced into the entire system? Because this is a very dynamic system, right? So let's just brainstorm what other ways.
Maybe I can talk about this multi-delegate feature that I proposed earlier, and then it actually took traction and now it's deployed. This is solving the centralization problem from a UI perspective. So I said the delegators are the biggest stakeholders in the system, and their decisions are the by far the most important. And those are the least sophisticated, the most generic, and they want to be as low touch as possible. And when you're looking at staking as an investment product, you see these validators with uptime, BLS keys, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, for a delegator, if you think about an average delegator, it's so hard to even, be interested in all of these things and select the validator that I can trust and put my stake in. So what we actually added is a multi-delegate feature where you can just select multiple validators on the staking dashboard in one go and submit them as a one transaction. So because as a general rule of thumb of any investment, you would want to diversify, especially if you're an unsophisticated investor, and most delegators will be. No one knows what makes a good validator in a normal, as a regular person. So that's what we wanted to make it really easy from a UI perspective as well. Also, we did a validator spotlight program before launching open staking because we had foundational nodes. We had the mainnet before, it just didn't have the staking functionality. So we had a 200 people validator community there. So we really wanted to bring those up to public, visible to our token holders. So we featured them in our Twitter as the validator of the week, and we gave some background, some useful information about their security setup, some node setup, and some of the fun facts about that validator. We try to humanize them more, and because it's really hard to market a validator as themselves, because it's the concept is so foreign to a lot of people. So that's another angle that we try to promote our rather smaller and like not institutional validators.
So how do you know that you're doing a better job today than you did last week and the month before and 2 months ago and 6 months prior in your role or in staking, right? As like if you're in charge of staking and everything that's associated with it, how do you know, like, what is that metric that you're tracking?
To be honest, those are the generic metrics that you would find probably all the projects are looking at right now. But what we actually had is we had a group of 10 people who emerged from this testnet community, who weren't nodes, who weren't anything, but they were technically more savvy than others, and they volunteered to step up and help others and just answer technical questions. And over the last 10 months, actually, that 10 people, we hired one of them as a core dev, and the remaining 9 is still working with us as an extended part of the Harmony engineering team. And when we discuss it with the team as well, we look back and like, what is the actual success that we did in the last 10 months, like until launching open staking? We all agree that 10 people team we call POPs is the best thing that happened to us.
On the record, share something that's controversial, that's something you believe in, that either your teammates or the community or validators they disagree with, and then you're fighting an uphill battle. So something I want you on the record that Gizem shared this controversial post.
I don't want to. Okay, so there was one thing. There was one thing about delegations. Of course, we didn't go to that route, but I was initially really strong about not allowing delegators to select validators. I thought we could come up with a more optimal system that just distributes the delegations to existing validators. And I did not believe delegators would be a good decision-making party because they have like so little information about the validators as we see the actual outcome today. But Polkadot, I believe, handles this in I think maybe a similar, maybe a hybrid manner, but there are now approaches that we're seeing that delegations are handled at the protocol level in a way that optimizes decentralization and network security. So that's something that I was pitching, but I was so junior and didn't know a lot. So I was shut down pretty quickly, but it's something that I still think about every once in a while.
What's next for you?
What's next? Okay, so after we launched the staking, now it's the time to focus on adoption. And we launched the grants program. Steven tweeted about it last week. It's gonna be the $7 million worth of grant program. We really look up to Ethereum's and Polkadot's grant programs. We all reaching out to all of their grant projects that have did great work with them last year. So I think that's gonna change a lot of our that's gonna change our life so much, I believe, because we were really focused on this one product, which is staking, and it was really focused. The whole team was on the same thing. But right now we're all looking at like different horizons, working with different projects and partners, really focusing on like having the users, having the transactions, like having the utility on the chain. And I'm personally a little like nervous because it's gonna look a lot more differently now, just interacting with external people and having them deploy on Harmony. So that's the one big thing coming.
Very cool. And so you're switching your focus from open staking to the grants program.
Yes. So I won't be working more on the staking functionality, but I'm still in the product team. It means for example, staking dashboard was the first product that I took from zero to kind of what it is right now. Of course, with everyone in the team. But so I still have the ownership of those staking dashboards. Some other products are coming up. So there's this product management work going on as well. But 80% of my attention and effort will be spent on grants for sure. Oh, I really wanted to say that we also have a YouTube channel, Harmony Protocol. Robin is a filmmaker and does an amazing job explaining some of the things that maybe I even failed to explain about staking. And there's a series of like Open Staking 101 from how to delegate, how the dashboard works, what is the median, what is the total stake, what is EPOS. So those are actually all explained in nice bits videos that has like amazing graphics. So check that out to like really educate yourself about staking.